we're good to
Okay.
go.
Hi, Amy. It's great to be with you today, and I'm so excited to learn more about Neuvana and Xen. And so I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your background and how you became a part of the Neuvana team and the role you play on the team.
Sure. Hi, Melissa. It's great to be here, and thank you for having me. I'm a registered nurse by background, so I spent about 20 years either as a nurse or manager or director running different departments in the hospital. All of my background is intensive care. So everything from trauma and burns to open heart, and then moving into procedural areas in the cath lab. And in that time, I met a surgeon who was one of the cardiac surgeons in our hospital. And he also had numerous medical devices that he had invented. And I have a real interest in engineering. It's just fascinating to me. So over time, we had similar interests, and he asked me to get involved with one of his projects, which is now Neuvana and vagus nerve stimulation.
Great. Great. So can you tell us a little bit about the vagus nerve itself and what it does?
Sure. So the vagus nerve is something that, even as a nurse at the bedside in the hospital, I knew very, very little about the vagus nerve. And to find out through this particular project and through this company and this device, to find out what the vagus nerve can actually do was absolutely mind-blowing. So it actually starts at the brainstem. So your brain has what are called cranial nerves, and they're in pairs. So this happens to be the longest pair of cranial nerves, starts at the brainstem and communicates both ways between the brain and almost every organ in the body. So it's a communication pathway that starts here, it tracks down through the chest, and then as it collates into one cable, essentially, then it hits the spleen, the pancreas, the intestines, the entire gut, the kidneys, the lungs, the heart. So it really reaches out to everything and transmits information through neurotransmitters back and forth.
Wow. Yeah, so it's pretty important.
It is. It's really important.
Yeah, yeah. So what was the inspiration for Xen and how does it work with the vagus nerve?
Okay. So when I refer to the surgeon that is really the essential founder of the company and the inventor of the product, he has in his experience as a surgeon, and I can attest to my experience as a nurse, you see the gravity of illness that comes after, especially really stress-induced poor lifestyle choices, and sometimes even just genetics. The hand you get dealt, right? So one of the things that he really wanted to do was bring something to general consumers that would allow them to manage some of their own wellness without having to go to pharmaceuticals or anything that they're ingesting or surgery or anything like that, and just something to actually make them feel better. And the vagus nerve itself, you have two sides of your nervous system, right? You have the side that is fight or flight, that something's sort of back in the day, the original theory was something's chasing me, I need to get away from the predator. And so your nervous system gears up and floods with all these high emotion neurotransmitters and messages and says, okay, run from the tiger. So you run from the tiger, and then the other side of your nervous system, once you get into a safe place, helps calm everything down and helps you recover. So the vagus nerve is really the majority of that side of your nervous system. So, and it's hard to access. There are ways that over time, there was an implanted surgical device that was implanted in the neck, and there was a coil that was wrapped around the vagus nerve with an implanted little messenger, like a pacemaker, to help people with epilepsy. Okay, and so when this was implanted, what was noted in the literature is that people actually it didn't just help their seizures, it helped them feel better. people in general said, wow, I just feel better. I have a better quality of life. My mood is better. So that was the piece that Dr. Cartledge really honed in on and said, okay, there's something here. How else can we access this nerve without having to go inside the body?
And one thing I've been curious about with those internal sort of invasive stimulators is, are they stimulating nearly all the time? Or do you know about that? Like, is it constant stimulation that they provide, or just once in every hour, or?
Right, they're different. I mean, it's definitely different. They have a different pattern. It is almost continuous with small breaks.
Okay.
Right, so they go in tiny little sequences, and then there are breaks in between, but it is basically continuous.
Wow. So there's not like this, you could basically use Xen a whole lot, and theoretically there wouldn't be a problem with that. There's
right, theoretically, but you know what we do know is it's more is not better.
Okay.
So in training your vagus nerve, it's really about intentional moments to take the time and stimulate your vagus nerve, whether you do it with electrical stim, which is what our product does, or whether you do it with meditation, with breathing exercises. Some people like to jump into ice water. I don't, but
yeah.
but all of those things can absolutely help stimulate the vagus nerve.
That's great. So why do you see the vagus nerve as such a valuable target for Xen stimulation? And could you also just tell us a little bit about how does Xen stimulate the vagus nerve itself?
Sure. So I'll start with that, how it stimulates the vagus nerve. There's actually a convenient branch of the vagus nerve called the auricular branch, which is just another word for ear, that comes out through the ear canal and branches out into some different parts of the ear itself. The area we target is this little spot right here, which is the tragus, and the inside of the tragus, it's like that little triangle cartilage piece on your ear. So the back side of that and the outer third of the ear canal are known to be well innervated with with this branch of the vagus nerve. So we target that. And accessing it like that is just, it's simple. It's maybe not simple for all, but when we really looked at how to create this product, and the fact that there's something that we all do most every day, which is listen to music. So creating it with earbuds that are just, you know, it's kind of a normal habit to just put it, everyone knows how to put in earbuds, and it lines up to send the stimulation directly to the tragus.
That is really neat, you know, especially considering where it started off, which was that invasive surgical implantation, that there's a much simpler way to do it, and with so much less risk, I would think, than going to that extreme with implantation. Right.
And you know, some people need that level. There are certainly indications for surgical implants, but we're a wellness product, and we really are just focused on helping people get to a better place mentally, physically, emotionally.
Right. So you mentioned that there are two branches of these nerves. Does the vagus nerve go into both ears? And could you talk about why Xen specifically stimulates the left ear?
Sure, it does. It goes into both ears. So as we did all the early research and continuing on now, what's happened over time is all the original studies were only done on the left. The surgical implants are only on the left. And the theory was because the right side of the vagus nerve, or the right vagus nerve, actually attaches more to the heart, right? Or to a different part of the heart. So there was a concern that maybe if you stimulated on the right, that there was going to be some sort of heart rate related issue. But what we've found is over time and multiple studies that stimulating on the right does not significantly drop heart rate or anything like that, as well as stimulating in both ears. We've seen studies now with both ears. So the safety of the electrical stim is always, you know, top priority. So out of an abundance of caution, we said, okay, well, everyone else has used the left in all the research studies, whether they were ours or anyone else's. So let's stick with that.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Xen was invented by the surgeon who you're talking about, Dr. Cartledge, and he has a long history of patents and inventions. I read that he has over 100 patents, and some of them are very well known and widely used in medicine. And so could you tell us a little bit about his creation initially of Xen, and how he determined that he was going to do this and came up with such a safe, gentle way to stimulate the vagus nerve?
Sure. So, one of the things is that he's always focused on trying to make things A, better, second, or B, easier and simple to use, right? So one of the things that was noticed that we saw in the literature was that tolerating the feeling of this stimulation was actually unpleasant. So as he was looking, and there were several of us involved, and his brother is a physician as well, who was using some form of vagus nerve stimulation in his practice. So in looking at all of this, the main focus was really how to make this pleasant, easy to adopt, simple to use in everyday life. So creating it into an earbud, first of all, and pairing it with music. So this is the sort of consumer side of things, is that a lot of people, you enjoy listening to music, and no one wants to look like they're being treated, right? So if you think of electrical stimulation, it's typically done with headbands, sometimes with wet sponges and things that you really wouldn't want to be seen at your desk at work, or even on the subway, or when those things come back to being public transportation, then you really don't want to be seen with these odd looking electrical stim devices. So creating it into something that's actually very discreet and sort of, it looks normal, it doesn't look like there's anything unusual about it. And if you can pair the stimulation with your music, it makes it a little bit easier to tolerate. It's really, and that's one of the things I know we'll probably get to a little bit later, but I'll touch on it now, is the stimulation actually feels like a little bit of a tingle, something like that.
Yeah.
Now, people are extremely unique and have different levels of tolerance for things like that. So for the most part, it's really not unpleasant, and it shouldn't be. However, if you can pair it with a music signal and the stimulation actually marches along to the music that you're listening to, then that makes it a little bit easier, makes it more enjoyable.
Right. And one thing I can say from having used it is that Xen is very adjustable. So there's a lot of room, both in terms of the type of waveform it's sending you and also the intensity. And you can actually experience it as very pleasant, because there's so much variation that's built into it, that I can see how if you didn't have any control over it, it might feel slightly aversive or verge towards pain. But because there's so much built in under user control, you can really adapt it to whatever your preferences are. That's my experience. So I think it was designed very well.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. So you've touched on this a little bit, but could you talk a little bit more about why it was important to you and the team to make this a wellness product rather than something that's a medical device that's specific to epilepsy or specific to a given diagnosis and requires insurance approval and prescription, that sort of thing?
Right. So the FDA in the United States is always focused on safety, and we are 100% focused on safety. So those two goals are in complete alignment. Bringing something like this, which is essentially a stress relieving product, which mimics the results of intense meditation or intense deep breathing. These are things that really are not specifically medical devices. There is no FDA approval for yoga or for meditation. So even though this is electrical stimulation, which we meet all the FDA requirements for low voltage safety, so all of those boxes are checked right off the bat. But bringing something like this to say, here to the people who really struggle with meditation. I personally, I don't meditate regularly, whether it's because I choose not to, whether I think a lot of us say, I can't quiet my mind down enough to do that. This actually helps you get there. So it takes that first step for you and helps your brain. It kind of sends messages to your brain to say, okay, it's time to relax. And then the brain responds as it normally would and sends relaxing neurotransmitters to the rest of the organs and says, okay, guys, it's time to calm down. So for that reason, bringing something like this out to people in general at a time where stress in this country and in the world is increasing, and this was all, we've been doing this for several years now, so it was before pandemic, it was before, all the even recent changes, but really that's the main reason for wellness.
Right. And I mean, I think now more than ever, this kind of tool is so needed because there's so much heaviness in the world right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
And just in having looked into some of the medical devices, they're very hard to obtain. And some of them, many of them that are on the market are not even available in the United States unless you have an IRB approved study. So you could be a licensed practitioner and still not be able to access these. So Xen is really unique in terms of being so available to anyone who could benefit. And especially since it's so safe, that seems like a really good thing, that there aren't a million hoops to jump through to be able to access this useful technology.
Right.
So could you talk a little bit more about the nervous system and the role the vagus nerve plays in it? And I've heard the term vagal tone, and I wonder, what are some signs that someone may not have ideal vagal tone, or they may be someone who would particularly benefit from improved vagal tone or vagal stimulation, that kind of thing?
Okay. So there's a couple of questions there. So I'll start with the nervous system itself. So we talked a little bit earlier that you have the sympathetic side of the nervous system, which is that fight or flight. Your body keys up and you're ready for whatever that fight is. So whether that's a meeting presentation or whether it's a really important phone call, the one that none of us want to have, right? Your sympathetic system tends to gear you up so that you're ready for that. Your parasympathetic nervous system is the one that helps you recover from those events. Now, keep in mind, stress is important. So we need some level of stress, right? So that's where things get difficult, because in society over the last several decades, I think we can all agree that stress has become more constant, and the changes that are associated with the lives we all lead are coming. They're more complex, more constant, and in shorter, there are shorter gaps between them. So there's very, very little time to recover. So we get these really short, stressful events, whether it's all day long or even within an hour. And certainly over time, this all displays itself over and over and over. And there's very, very little time to recover from any of that. So unless we're intentional about that recovery, that's where our bodies start breaking down. So adding the vagus nerve into that, what happens is vagal tone will actually start decreasing. Vagal tone is your body's, it's an indicator of your body's ability to adapt. It's your body's indicator of resilience. So if you think of resilience, you think of the most resilient people you know. Why do you call them resilient? It's because it's like they're a punching bag, right? They've had one event right after another, and they keep popping up, and they move through to the next thing with grace. So I think that's what most of us want to be able to do, is I know I have to deal with all of these crazy stressors, whether they're big to me or they actually are big stressors. I want to be able to handle them, recover, and be ready for the next thing that's coming. So vagal tone is something that if you don't have great vagal tone, now your heart rate is high all the time. Your respiratory rate starts being high all the time, rather than this physiology that is much more relaxed, much more calm, and much more able to bring in information, process, and have your brain quiet enough to make good decisions, right, and process. So if you, you can read that vagal tone is something that we've talked about breathing already, that typically the coaching is take 10 good deep breaths, abdominal breathing, and that will help calm you down. And it absolutely does, right? If anyone takes time during a stressful moment, then they can help calm down during that moment. It's the ongoing stimulation of that vagus nerve to improve your vagal tone that's needed. So we do have, like some people just by genetics, you're prone to low vagal tone. Sorry, right? It's just, some of us don't have it. But there are ways to train it. So it's kind of like a muscle that you actually can improve your vagal tone by doing vagus nerve stimulating exercises.
Mm-hmm. And so how would low vagal tone contribute to inflammation and a lot of the chronic diseases that are related to inflammation that seem to be more and more widespread in modern day?
So it's such a good question. And some of this is more complicated, really on a pathophysiology explanation. But in the simplest way to put it, all of your organs are connected and speak through, especially the vagus nerve, right? So when you have low vagal tone and you're not able to help those organs relax, you have certain organs that will actually emit inflammatory factors. And it's actually, there are plenty of studies that show that vagus nerve stimulation and improved vagal tone actually decrease those specific, not every inflammatory marker, but several specific inflammatory markers. They actually take them down, just even whether it's a breathing study, whether it's invasive vagus nerve stimulation, or even vagus nerve stimulation through the ear. And these are still studies that are needing to be repeated, but those are the early results that vagus nerve stimulation will help with those inflammatory markers, because of the fact that the body, when you're not resilient, stress weighs on the brain and the organs, and you have this constant barrage of the negative neurotransmitters, the epinephrine, your heart rate is higher, your respiratory rate might be higher, your digestion decreases, your muscle tone, I think people would agree that, there's more of a tension, which is not conducive to the body recovering. And the inflammation is a response to that stress.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty fascinating. So you've talked a little bit about today and how there are so many stressors and life is so constant. It's so hard to turn the barrage of information and demands. It's so hard to turn that off. And it can be hard to be constantly mindful of our own state in order to take the pause to help ourselves recover. Do you think that low vagal tone is more widespread today than it has been in the past? And why or why not?
Yeah, I would agree that it probably is, even though I don't have data behind that, but I think just looking at the world in general, and we have a unique opportunity because today we're in the middle of a pandemic, we're in the middle of social injustices, we're in the middle of some very intense times. And when I look at that, I think that even myself, and I feel that I'm, for the most part, I'm a pretty resilient person. I felt myself really low during these last few weeks. And I have to intentionally pick myself up. I have to intentionally do things that I know are good for my mind and my body. And you and I spoke earlier that we both have children. So sometimes that's the reason we keep doing things, is because we know we're responsible for other people. But I think in this world today, vagal tone is dropping because the stress level, we can't escape it. It's like a giant cloud that's over everything. And we have to be so intentional about being able to manage it. Sometimes you have to turn off the news, take your time to recover. You can turn it back on. You can have you can have those intense conversations. Those tough conversations are super important, but we do have to take the time in between and make sure we're taking care of ourselves and providing the environment for our body to be more resilient.
Mm-hmm. And I think most people can reach a point where the burden becomes so heavy that it's really hard to keep up self-care. And
Yes.
in just any tools we can find that might help lift us up just enough that we can keep going and take a little better care of ourselves are really valuable. And this, using Xen, might help some people who just feel like they need a little boost before they can get back in that good space.
Right.
I mean, there's so much.
The other thing, the thing I like about it is you can either multitask your relaxation, or you can literally recline in a chair or in the hammock or whatever you have. You can really shut out the world. Or if you say, you know what, I know this is good for me, I need to do some vagus nerve stimulation, but I have to get this email out, do it at the same time. I have to cook dinner, pop it in your pocket, put the earbud in your ear, and get dinner ready. All of that is okay. You can do all of those things at the same time without being very, very, very focused on it, because it's doing the work for you.
Right.
Sometimes I'll start doing it that way, and then I start feeling really relaxed during a session, and I say, oh, well, maybe I'll just take a few minutes and kick back from the computer and enjoy the relaxation.
Right. And I've used Zen both ways. It's certainly not something that demands you have to be meditating, you have to stop everything. It's very easy to do it while you're working, while you're dealing with your kids, that sort of thing. But it's also very relaxing, and it can be a great way to take a nap or fall asleep. It helps you unwind a little bit faster so you can get whatever your body needs to restore. And I think that's one of the things I do appreciate about it is that it's so versatile. And like you said, you can wear it without looking strange. You can wear it outside. There are so many devices these days that if you go out to the mailbox with it and a neighbor sees you, you're going to be a little embarrassed. But this is so subtle that you can really go about your day if you need to, and keep using the stimulation, which is really nice.
Yeah, that was super important, and definitely, right at the top of the list of features that we felt was important. If you have a wellness product, it should look and feel like a wellness product.
Right, which is great. And we've talked a little bit about how Xen can help with the negatives and vagus nerve stimulation helps with chronic issues, but how can it also help with optimizing performance and optimizing wellness for someone who feels like they're looking on kind of the positive ends of things and they just want to get more out of their day?
That's a great question. Because we do focus so much on all those intense stressors and sort of the negative side of things. So what's interesting is the vagus nerve and the way the brain works is, if you think about the fact that higher heart rate variability and vagal tone will lead to it's an indicator of better resilience, right? So resilience is also your body and your brain's ability to adapt and to learn. So there are these great studies out there about memory and cognition, really, and the brain and the way all of these things work together. So if you set your brain in the environment where you're down regulating or quieting down this sympathetic nervous system, and you're up regulating or stimulating the parasympathetic through the vagus nerve, then you now put your brain in this environment that it actually is easier to learn and recognize things. So whether it's something you've already learned and you're just going back through and you go, oh yes, I know what that is, and you can make decisions a little bit quicker because you're more focused. There's a little more clarity. So I think when we talk about, you're asking about optimizing, those are things like on the, what I would say is sort of on the simple end of things. If I need to crank out a report, it's not my favorite thing to do. But actually my fingers hit the keyboards a little faster. I know exactly, I don't know if you're a backspacer, but I'm a constant, I'll be typing and then I go, erase, backspace. And there, if I do a session and I'm really focused, I can get all the keys. I think much quicker. And Dr. Cartledge uses doing his taxes.
Wow.
As the example, he's like, I hate doing my taxes, but if he's got to do them, he said, I'll pop in a Zen session really quick and make sure I can focus and just get them done. So I think on the optimization level, there's so many studies that are ongoing right now. And we've been working with the University of Maryland and some other universities that are getting ready to publish papers, which we're super excited about, that are related to memory and cognition and all of these brain optimizing focus patterns.
That's great.
Yeah.
How would you advise people to use Zen to really optimize those benefits? And how soon do you think that a consumer might begin to notice things shifting a little bit?
For pattern, we suggest twice a day. Okay, so I'll start with sleep because we haven't really touched on sleep.
Sure.
And sleep is one of the greatest benefits of this product. So, and of vagus nerve stimulation in general. So if you stimulate the vagus nerve, if you use your Zen within an hour of bedtime, and what happens is, and you can use it with music, you can use it without music, it really doesn't matter, whatever's your preference, but use it within an hour of bedtime, most people will fall asleep faster and have a longer period of sleep without getting up and without extra movement. So looking at that, I think anyone who's struggling with sleep, really, you've got to do it within an hour of bedtime. Okay, sort of make it part of your night care routine. Mm-hmm. During the day, I would say anytime before lunch. If you have sort of a routine and you say, okay, I'm doing the dishes, or most of us are working from home still. So whatever it is that's in your routine that you can keep it part of your routine, whether you're getting ready, you're doing the dishes really quick, you're sitting down at your computer, do it for 15, 20 minutes at that point as well. And one of the things that's important is if you are sleep deprived, it could make you sleepy, because until you get your sleep back on track, anything that relaxes you will likely make you sleepy, right? So if you use it before bed and you get your sleep pattern in order, then additionally during the day, it can help you focus.
And is it more ideal to space those two stimulation sessions apart from each other, or could someone stack them if they're chronically tired? Could they do it twice before bed, or is it more ideal to separate them and do it 2 different times?
Right. You can stack them. There's really no reason not to, but I feel like the benefit is separating them, right? So you could just do 1 session a day. If your main issue is sleep and you just want to take care of your sleep, just do 1. That's totally fine. And I think what happens, what we see that is happening, whether it's from our customers or from, we have a lot of life coaches that we communicate back and forth with. So what we see is not everyone responds right away. And sometimes it takes weeks for people to respond. And there are a couple of reasons for that. So one is those who have low vagal tone or low heart rate variability, they typically are the people who are most out of balance and will actually feel the effects quickest. So even within the first session, they'll go, wow, that feels really relaxing. The other group of people that may feel things readily or right away are people who are already familiar with what that relaxation feels like. So the brain has already learned what relaxation feels like and can recognize it and get there very quickly. So the second part is people who have that low vagal tone, it may be so low that it actually takes a long time of consistent vagus nerve stimulation to get them to a point where they can identify feeling better.
Right.
And so regular use every day for sometimes 3 and 4 weeks. It's unusual, but there is a population of people that need that, probably 10%.
That makes sense though, just because if you think about almost any intervention, a lot of them, like if you were trying to meditate, there are a lot of benefits associated with that, but you might not get them until you've been practicing it a while. Right. Because for some people, there's just this certain threshold you have to reach before you reap the benefits. So I think that does make sense for a subset of users. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit more about heart rate variability and how that relates to vagal tone?
Sure. So heart rate variability, what you want a higher heart rate variability. And what this means is when you're breathing in, the way our physiology works, when you're breathing in, your heart rate goes up. And when you breathe out, your heart rate goes down. And the more difference there is between those two extremes, then the more responsive your vagus nerve is, in theory. Okay, so that's where the vagal tone is tied to the heart rate variability. So because that variability, so if you take a triathlete probably has heart rate variability is way up here. So if a triathlete uses vagus nerve stimulation, probably not going to make much of a difference, right? Because the difference would be very, very, very small. Whereas someone who is not in the best health, doesn't have great mindfulness practices, doesn't take good care of themselves, they may feel something a little bit, maybe a little bit more immediate.
Right.
So that the connection between heart rate variability and why we want it higher, that's the indicator of resilience and vagal tone.
And either anecdotally or in any of the studies, have you seen heart rate variability change with using Xen?
Yeah, that's another really good question. So I was on the phone with someone actually in the UK who has done a lot of heart rate variability studies. He works with his clients, and even though we aren't selling in the UK right now, which will be another few months while we get our CE certifications, but we were talking about it, and he uses the Aura ring. There's actually a little ring, it's a wearable that tracks heart rate variability. And he sees a correlation between vagus nerve stimulation and heart rate variability. We have seen it ourselves, and there definitely is literature that points to an increase in heart rate variability with vagus nerve stimulation. There's at least one study that I've seen that doesn't show a significant difference, but I think that's the importance of looking at literature across the entire subject to make sure that we're all looking at things the same way.
Right.
So one of the things I'll say is we're so focused on being the experts in stimulation delivery and making sure that we can hit the right targets, be a really, really safe consumer product, and be available. And our app allows us to make changes with science, right? So we stay, as we're growing as a company and growing our relationships with neuroscientists and universities and researchers, that's the part that's really exciting to us, is that it's hard to keep on top of all the literature, because there's really an explosion right now of all the information that's coming out. So as we learn more about what people are doing, we want to make sure that we're all headed in the same direction, right? We're all looking at the same biomarkers like heart rate variability, or there are many different ways to measure vagus tone and vagus nerve stimulation. So I know that answer kind of wound around all kinds of things, but that's what we're seeing, is that yes, there are plenty of people that have an increase in heart rate variability, but we think it's mostly related to regular use.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And so just in talking about how you're staying at the edge in the forefront of science, one of the things that Dr. Cartledge has said is that the Xen is really future-proof because of the app, and the app can be updated with new signals as they're discovered in studies and research. And right now, there are several different sensations people can choose from, as well as waveforms. Could you talk a little bit about, where those have come from and how users can choose what might be best for them among all the different choices in the app?
Sure. Yeah, it's something that, when we look at it now, we thought it would be so helpful to have a menu of options.
Yeah.
Now, I think what we didn't really appreciate was that it's not intuitive to everyone.
Yeah.
So there are some things that, we're figuring out as we go along with our consumer product, that we live it every day. So it's such a great question. So the waveforms themselves are actually the microsecond individual little pulses that are within this pattern. So, they're so fast that you can't really see them. You have to have a oscilloscope to see these little patterns or these shapes. So the waveforms, that's what those are. The sensations is really just the pattern of how, and I'll kind of draw it with my hand, you go, the intensity or the stimulation strength will go up. So we add stimulation and then go down. Or there are some sensations that bounce around, that are a little bit faster. So ocean waves and mountaintop are both slow. They gradually increase and then they gradually decrease, both of those. So we have cityscape is faster. It's, a lot more stimulation, high points within a minute than the other two. Is there a big difference, between those? Not really. So I'll start with the waveform. So the waveforms themselves feel different on your skin. All right. So some people are a little more sensitive than others. Their skin is more sensitive than other people. So waveform A it has a different characteristic of the waveform that makes it actually more difficult for some people to even feel it.
Yeah.
Whereas waveform C has a characteristic that makes it easier to feel. Now, the interesting part is you don't have to feel the stimulation at all. So the studies that are out there, because there has to be a way to do double-blind studies, then you have to run stimulation where people don't feel it. And that's done with some frequency at a lot of the universities. So you can run waveform A and you may not be able to feel it, but we have we have indicators within the app and on the device itself that show stimulation is running.
Right.
So if the little flash symbol is blue on the app and your LED lights on your Xen unit are lavender or purple, then you're getting stimulation. You may not feel it, but you're getting it. So those are the indicators we built in to make sure you knew, okay, stimulation is running, I just can't feel it.
Right.
So that's the waveform piece. So it's really just a preference of, I like to feel it, I don't really care if I feel it, and that's what that is. So the sensation pattern is, it may take longer to get the same amount of current delivered to the vagus nerve with a slower sensation. But the truth is, no one's really sure if that's what matters or if it's just the stimulation itself. We've seen, you know, with all the literature that's coming out, you'll see consistently people, you know, the neuroscientists are saying, we're just not sure.
Wow. Wow. So that's really interesting that it's not determined yet. Do you know if the intensity of the stimulation makes a difference in terms of, with any of those waveforms and sensations, it goes from 5 to 25 in terms of, you know, the adjustment of how strong it will feel in your ear. And I have noticed that with some of them, like A and some of the slower waveforms, you can really have the intensity a lot higher, and it feels the same as maybe C and Cityscape on a lower sensation. And are you going to get more benefit by turning the stimulation up as high as you can take it before it becomes uncomfortable, or do we not really know if the intensity relates to the amount of benefit that you'll get from a session?
Right, good question. We don't see that there is benefit from going higher intensity.
Okay.
And one of the things that I'll say is, a lot of times when customers will tell me that, you know, they're cranking up the intensity and they feel like it's uncomfortable. Well, don't do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Take the intensity down to where it's either pleasant or not unpleasant, or take it down to, you know, just, you can start where you can feel it and then back it down to where you can't really feel it. But then gives you a better idea that, you know, the stimulation is coming. But we don't see big benefits at all with increasing the intensity to the max. And quite honestly, just because of the location of the nerve, you could start getting some muscle tension if you, just like you would with, you know, maybe a TENS unit or something. So just take it down to where it's just pleasant, because you don't want any of the muscles to get tight and then you feel like you're going to get a headache or something, because that would be the only side effects of this device, of the Xen unit, is really irritation. Skin irritation happens occasionally, and as long as you're cleaning the earbuds, you know, you can take them off, you can literally wash them with soap and water, and then dry the electrodes and put them back on. Or sometimes people will get a headache, but it's usually from what you're saying, that people are turning up the intensity really, really high, and they don't realize that they're getting a little bit of muscle tension from that.
And to me, it's kind of incredible, the difference between, you know, the low intensity where you're like, is something happening? I think it is. And it's very subtle, versus you can really turn it up to where it does become uncomfortable. And that threshold, I'm sure, just depends on the individual, but it's good to know that you really can get the benefit without getting to that point of discomfort, that you shouldn't even go there. Just don't go up that high.
And for people who can't, who want to feel it, but they may have high skin resistance. So we include, there's a little saline sprayer, and you just literally mix up salt water, or you throw contact lens solution in there and you spray it on the earbud, and that helps with the conductivity.
I have noticed that. I've done it both ways, and I definitely, when it has the saline solution on it, much lower intensity is needed for the same effect. So it really does make a difference. And for some people, it might really improve what they're getting out of it.
Yes.
So that's really good to know that you can be totally comfortable and still get the same benefits. What are the most important benefits from your point of view that you've heard from users or that you're noticing from people who may be even incorporating Xen into research?
So from our users directly, it's sleep is probably right at the top.
Yeah.
So sleep and decreasing their stress response. So people who they feel very anxious at certain times, or they just feel like they can't manage their responses to things. It actually will help you dampen that initial urge to lash out. So we've heard that a lot, which is, I don't think that was anything I really expected to hear, that people are saying, my spouse or my children say I'm nicer to be around, which that's what I would love. I would love for the world to change so that everyone is a little bit nicer to be around.
Yes.
So those two things, sleep and just really that anxious and that high stress reaction, those are the two things we're hearing about the most often. And then in the research community, gosh, Melissa, there is so much going on in the research community that's really, really fun to keep up with. So, even the military, everyone is studying things related to memory and cognition, which I think is still, it's probably in the early to middle stages of research over the last 5 to 10 years. And even so, I'll share a personal story. My dad is having early memory problems, okay? And it's very frustrating for him. So while I can't correlate exactly how to help him with electrical stimulation, and I don't know if it's going to help him with his memory, it's helping him with the stress of not being able to remember. And I think there's a connection there with all of these things that we're going to find out over time, that stress is the demon that sort of prevents us from being great.
Yeah.
And even that the good amount of stress, that's fine. It's the chronic stress and the overwhelming feelings that, it just makes things really hard. So now, for my dad, my mom helps him and, gives him a little electrical stim. It helps him relax. And then he's able to talk through some of the things that are frustrating for him rather than lashing out.
That's great. And I think when we do reach that point of stress, it's so hard to think clearly, or to cope well. I think there's a point at which we really lose touch with a lot of our resources, and to be able to get back to a centered place is so valuable.
Right. Yeah.
One other thing I was wondering is, what ages has Xen been used with, or do you recommend it for? Just because it seems like it has the potential to help such a wide swath of people, but is there a certain age at which it becomes a good idea, or it becomes safe, or it's known to be safe?
So we recommend or suggest 18 and older, just because there haven't been a lot of focused trials on children.
Okay.
So, we said 18 and over because every states tend to have a different definition of children versus adults. Sure. So I think it has to be someone at the age where they can really walk through the intensities, make sure that it's a comfortable stimulation pattern, and make sure that they're able to navigate the controls. That's just part of the safety. Now we also know that HRV, we've talked about HRV and vagal tone, those things tend to decrease over time. So your vagal tone actually continues to drop as you get into your 40s, your 50s, your 60s. So it's incredibly low then. And so there's a study out of England that only stimulated the ear for people 55 and over, and did it for 3 weeks, regular use every day. And it's so interesting because they all reported, statistical significance, I'll say, reported better mood, a better quality of life. And it's so interesting that something like this, I don't think we realize that this is where our moods have gone.
Right.
When you look back a few years ago, or you look back a few months ago and you say, gosh, I think I was a fun person. I think I was really interested in having a good time. And now I just feel glum. So it's time to focus on those things, take the stressors, learn how to deal with them, and manage what it's doing to our bodies and our minds.
Yeah, that's great. And as you say this, I'm thinking of the people in my life who could benefit, from this sort of thing. And it's hard to think of anyone who wouldn't,
Right.
So as you look to the future, and staying at the cutting edge of all this explosive movement in the science, where do you see your company headed, and where do you see the device headed and the app? What might users and consumers look forward to as the science keeps moving?
I think what's going to happen is the science will be certainly more well-defined and more coordinated among all the different people who are researching. So for us, we're going to make sure that we have the most easy to use, targeted, anatomically targeted product that is the safest. And then as these new waveforms or information comes out, then we'll be able to upload them to the app. I think we've already talked about that. But the other thing is, I think it'll also be, we're looking at the possibility of programs and sort of pre-programmed guided sessions, right? So one of the things that I mentioned earlier, we thought a great menu would be, a great idea. But when people don't really know even where to start, I think that's what we're seeing in the future is we'll be able to have, excuse me, we'll be able to have some coached sessions that will allow you to get through this type of situation. Or if I have 5 minutes, what do I do? If I have 10 minutes, what do I do? If I want to go to sleep, what do I do? So I think we see more of that in the future rather than just here's your open book, and you can dabble.
Sure. I think that would be so exciting to have targeted things. It's fun to explore the app, but it's also really it's so neat to imagine there'd be something that would specifically really target relaxation or specifically target even concentration and help you learn better or focus better. So thinking that the specificity might get more targeted like that is really exciting.
Yeah, it is really exciting.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for answering all these questions and teaching me so much about the science of HRV and the vagus nerve. I really appreciate it. And I love the product as well. So it's been great to hear about it.
Yeah, this was so great. Thank you so much. And you've done great research. Your questions were awesome. And I do hope it's helped. And anything that you need from us in the future, please reach out. And to your readers and listeners, definitely reach out. We have a 30-day money back guarantee, so it's definitely something that can be tried and returned. And my customer experience team is phenomenal. They're very well educated and patient.
They're very helpful, so helpful, and they get back to you right away. It's not one of those companies. I think that's a big frustration people have is, yes, there's a return policy, but will anyone get back to me about it?
Right.
And then some places there's a big lapse, but not with Neuvana. It's really excellent.
Awesome. Thank you. It's definitely our focus.
Yes. Thank you so much, Amy. It's been great to talk with you.
Great to talk with you too, Melissa. Have a super day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.